Imagine a scheme so outrageous that it promised endless riches, roped in the brightest minds of the age, and seduced even the government of Britain itself. A scheme that turned aristocrats into beggars, merchants into thieves, and politicians into criminals. Now imagine this: the scheme was legal. 3 centuries before cryptocurrencies, meme stocks, and housing bubbles, Britain was consumed by a financial mania so powerful it almost tore the empire apart. This is the story of the South Sea Bubble, the scam that bankrupted Britain. But here's the mystery. How did a company with no real business, no real profits, and no real assets convince an entire nation, including its king, its parliament, and its financial elite, to pour their life savings into a dream? And what can this disaster teach us today about bubbles that are still forming all around us? To understand the South Sea Bubble, we need to go back to early 18th century Britain. Britain had just emerged from a century of near-constant war against Spain, against France, and against itself during the English Civil War. Wars are expensive, and Britain had paid for these wars with debt, mountains of it. By 1710, the national debt had exploded to over £9 million, a staggering sum for the time. Interest payments alone threatened to crush the economy. The government needed a solution, and into this crisis stepped a man named Robert Harley, Chancellor of the Exchequer. Harley proposed something bold: create a company that would take over chunks of the national debt in exchange for special privileges. The company would be called the South Sea Company. Its supposed purpose? To trade with South America and the Spanish colonies. Vast, exotic lands full of gold, silver, sugar, and slaves. But there was a problem. Britain was at war with Spain, which meant this trade was a fantasy. So why did investors still flock to it? Because the South Sea Company had the blessing of the government, the lure of monopoly trade, and, most dangerously, the promise of infinite profits. At its heart, the South Sea Company wasn't a trading business. It was a debt for equity swap machine. Here's how it worked. The company would buy government debt from investors. In return, those investors would get shares in the company. The government loved it because it could roll over debt into something investors wanted. Investors loved it because shares promised not only dividends, but also the possibility of South American trade riches. It was a win-win on paper. By 1713, the Treaty of Utrecht ended Britain's war with Spain. Suddenly, the South Sea Company had its in to South America, or so it claimed. The truth? Spain only granted Britain the asiento, a tiny license to sell 4,800 enslaved Africans per year into Spanish colonies. Hardly the gold rush of dreams. But investors didn't care. The hype machine was too powerful. The South Sea Company's directors lobbied Parliament, bribed officials, and spread tales of endless silver mines and treasure-laden ships waiting in the New World. Soon, South Sea stock became the hottest ticket in London. By 1720, the mania hit fever pitch. The company proposed a grand bargain. It would take on almost the entire national debt of Britain, over £30 million, in exchange for more shares. Parliament approved. The scheme was ingenious and dangerous. The more debt the company absorbed, the more shares it issued. The more shares it issued, the more hype it created. And the more hype, the higher the price climbed. Shares that once traded at £100 shot up to £300. Then £500. By June 1720, they reached nearly £1,000. Everyone wanted in. Aristocrats mortgaged their estates. Merchants sold their ships. Even members of Parliament took bribes, in the form of discounted shares, to keep the frenzy alive. And the bubble spilled over. Across London, bubble companies popped up overnight, offering schemes even more absurd than the South Sea Company. One infamous startup promised a company for carrying on an undertaking of great advantage, but nobody knows what it is. Investors lined up anyway. It was madness. But bubbles always burst. By late summer 1720, cracks began to show. First, insiders, company directors, and well-connected politicians quietly began to cash out their shares. Rumors spread that the South Sea's profits were illusions. At the same time, competition loomed. The Bank of England and the East India Company offered rival schemes to manage government debt. Confidence wavered. By August, panic selling began. The price plunged from £1,000 to £700, then £400. By September, it crashed to under £150. Thousands were ruined overnight. Nobles, clergymen, merchants, Even common shopkeepers, their life savings evaporated. And the government? Exposed. Many members of Parliament had been bribed or complicit in the fraud. The scandal rocked Parliament. Britain's economy teetered on collapse. The fallout was brutal. Families who had dreamed of fortunes were left destitute. Banks failed. Businesses shuttered. The South Sea Company itself, once the pride of the nation, was bankrupt. Public outrage boiled over. Parliament launched investigations. It was revealed that company directors had bribed officials, falsified records, and inflated promises. Several directors were arrested. Their estates ceased to repay victims. Even John Blunt, the company's mastermind, was disgraced. The government scrambled for fixes. The Bank of England and East India Company stepped in to absorb some debts. A partial bailout was arranged, but the scars ran deep. Trust in Britain's financial system was shattered. And yet, unlike modern bailouts, ordinary investors recovered little. The rich and powerful often walked away protected. You might think, that was 300 years ago. We'd never fall for that again. But history has a rhythm, and the South Sea Bubble's DNA is everywhere. In the dot-com bubble of the 1990s, companies with no profits sold dreams of internet riches. In the 2008 financial crisis, complex debt swaps promised endless growth until the housing market collapsed. In the crypto boom of 2021, tokens with no utility soared on hype alone, only to collapse and wipe out billions. The same ingredients appear every time: government complicity, insider profiteering, public greed, and the belief that this time is different. But it never is. One chilling parallel: just as the South Sea Company absorbed Britain's national debt, today governments load financial markets with trillions in bonds and stimulus, fueling asset bubbles that seem unshakable until they're not. Number 1. Hype can bankrupt nations. The South Sea Bubble wasn't just a market scam. It nearly destroyed Britain's financial credibility. Number 2. Insiders always cash out first. Directors and politicians sold at the top, while ordinary investors were left with nothing. Number 3. History rhymes. From dot-coms to crypto, bubbles follow the same cycle: promise, mania, collapse. Recognizing the pattern is the only protection. The South Sea Bubble shows us that markets aren't just about money, they're about trust. Once trust collapses, no empire, no government, no financial system is safe. So, the next time you hear about a can't-miss opportunity, remember, fortunes rise fast, but they fall even faster. What bubbles are forming around us right now? And when they burst, who will pay the price? If you want to keep learning from the financial disasters of the past to protect your wealth today, make sure to subscribe to Historic Cashflow, because history doesn't repeat itself, but in finance it always rhymes.